So hello everyone again. Thank you very much for joining our panel today, Bridging Science and Strategy, the role of statisticians in drug development. My name is Umut Özbek. I'm a statistician at Lilly, and I'm honored to have today Scott Clark and Rick Hicks on this panel with us. I will introduce them very briefly, and then I will dive right into our questions. Scott Clark was an associate vice president at Lilly, leading the statisticians supporting discovery, development, manufacturing, and a group in bioinformatics before his retirement. Prior to joining Lilly, he was an associate professor of biostatistics at Emory University. He is an ASA fellow. His research interests include Markov modeling, clinical trials, and all aspects of statistical consulting. Our second panelist, Rick Hicks, is a vice president at Lilly. He has worked in discovery research at Lilly for over 30 years. He is currently leading a group of statisticians and genomics scientists supporting preclinical research. He has made key contributions to multiple projects that have resulted in drug candidates that are in clinical development and the market. Without any further ado, I would like to start with my first question to our panelists. So what is drug development and who is a drug developer? Scott, may I start with you first?
Sure, Umut. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Very good. Thanks so much. Well, I think in terms of drug development, I think it's a lot more than what most people think about in terms of, I think most people's naive conception of drug development is they probably start to think about clinical trials as their primary thing. They think statisticians are involved in designing clinical studies and then analyzing clinical studies, and is the drug safe and effective, and that's the primary remit of what statisticians do in drug development. But I think it's so much more than that, and I hope we'll get into a little bit of that today as we describe this. But from the earliest stages of discovery, which Rick can speak to much more eloquently than I can, all the way through manufacturing and health outcomes and the value of medicine, there's a role for statisticians, and I think drug development encompasses all of those things, encompasses many of those elements across that spectrum. So I hope that's just a quick saying of what it is, but maybe Rick can comment further on a few more details.
Sure, thanks. Hopefully you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, okay, yeah, so that's a great statement, Scott. I mean, yeah, what is drug development? I think it's the process or the mechanism by which, we as humans, create these things and build them. And it's a massive process. We'll hopefully get into that a little bit later, but it begins at the very early stages of like picking a biological target to build the drug against, or to work against or work with, and goes all the way through marketing. Drug development are it's the mechanism by which we build these things, we engineer these molecules or whatever. Who is a drug developer? I think almost anybody in a pharma company can be a drug developer, and we really want people to take that mindset of whether you're a chemist or a biologist or an antibody engineer or a statistician. You probably need to think of yourself as a drug developer. You have a different toolkit than your colleagues, but you need to have that mindset of you're at a company, like a Lilly or a biotech company or a big pharma, to do drug development. And it's not something that is really taught much in school. So you kind of have to learn how to become a drug developer on the job. But as a statistician, you're really well placed to be a great drug developer if you put the effort and time into that. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was actually when I organized the session, that was my goal, that being a drug developer is a little different than what we learn in grad school as statisticians. And I think your insights will be very valuable to our audience. And please, if you have any questions, please enter them in the chat. We will be monitoring that as well. So let me move to my second question. Why is statistics important in drug development? Maybe, Rick, I can start with you this time.
Sure. So as I think about drug development, I started a moment ago, I said, we start with trying to pick a biological target that we want to inhibit or enhance, right? That's probably our first decision. Maybe our first decision is what diseases do we want to go into, right? And so from that point forward, drug development largely consists of probably many thousands of decisions that have to be made throughout that process. What's the target? What type of drug am I going to use to do this? Is it going to be a small molecule? Is it going to be an antibody? And then all the decisions that go into engineering that drug, all the decisions that go into, finding out the right patients for that drug, the right trial design, just all the way through. So these are all very challenging decisions. They're very expensive. Failure rates are high. The information is not always there that you would like. So these are some of the reasons why I think probably I'm totally biased, but I think statistics is arguably some of the best training you could have to do drug development, because you can participate in all of these decisions that need to be taken across the lifespan of a project. So as one way to think of statistics is like the science of decision making, and so as statisticians, we're kind of uniquely trained to think about problems differently than our colleagues do. So that doesn't mean we still have to learn the business, we still have to learn the science in order to marry those two things together with our stats training. Probably talk about that a little bit later, but that's why I think statistics is probably the most important. If you had to pick one single training for like drug development, I think it's a really an outstanding background to have and perspective to have, not just the super technical stuff, but also just the statistical thinking aspects. And then last thing I'll say is it's becoming even more important, certainly over my career. It's become a much more data intensive endeavor than it was, say, 10, 20, 30 years ago, particularly on the preclinical side, where we have just incredible amounts of data. Both volume and the complexity and the relationships between those data is really intense, and so it's a very natural place to think of opportunities for statisticians to participate in those early decisions that get made on a development project. So those are some of the things that come top of mind from my perspective.
Thank you very much, Rick. Scott, would you like to add anything?
Sure. Just when I think about the statistics role in drug development, I mean, I think 5 things sort of jump to mind and then I'll try to hit them quickly, which is one, just the problem structuring and solving. I think asking the right question is so critical for statisticians to do. And I think they're uniquely trained to think about things in that problem structuring and solving environment. Two is the sort of the data and information synthesis that they're able to do. I think inference is at the heart of statistics and what we do. And I think they're really, there's a lot of key important aspects related to inference in that data information synthesis process. The other is the process and system thinking, understanding bias, understanding variability, explaining those things to who are less familiar with that becomes so critical. And then the last two are just a little bit more of the curious mindset. I think that so many statisticians have. I think a lot of people go into the field because they want to learn and learn about many different things. That curious mindset is really critical in as a skill set for statisticians to have in drug development. And lastly, just the objective approach that you often bring. I think those are things that can also be really critical to make you more of a complete drug hunter, thinking partner, and scientific leader in drug development.
Thank you very much. And my next question is, what are the challenges to be a statistician in this environment? I believe that is one of the hardest questions I have for you. Scott, would you like to take that first?
Sure. I think one of the hardest challenges, there's a couple that I think are particularly difficult. And I think this is true in drug development, but I see it true in some other spaces outside of industry as well. One of which is just industry, or not just within industry, but the communication that's necessary to take mathematical ideas and concepts and translate them to those that are less familiar with that, and to do that effectively. Because certainly in the drug development process, you're working with a lot of people that aren't trained in this space. And so the communication and communicating effectively is so critical. But I think one of the other challenges, though, relates to that, which is meeting your colleagues halfway on where they have knowledge. That is, if you don't bring some level of effort to your scientific knowledge, whether if you say, it's clinical knowledge, if you're working with a clinician, or it's, chemistry knowledge, if you're working with a chemist, or whatever it is that you're trying to say, I've got to know more than just sort of the statistical approach that is best here. I really need to understand the science and the background of the problem that's going on. And I think it's often underestimated and underappreciated what that really can translate into. And I think that's really a challenge for a lot of people to understand the biology, the chemistry, the clinical aspects, the market, the regulatory requirements, the pricing environment, whatever it is you're working with across the spectrum. Understanding those things is not trivial, and I think that's a real challenge, because that's not something that that you're used to doing when you work in mathematics and mathematical thinking all the time. This is something very different. You've got to really have that domain knowledge along the way. So those are, I think, a couple of the big challenges. I'm sure there's more, but those are the two that come to mind right away.
Yeah, so this is similar to like a question I get frequently when we interview. Students will ask about like what are the things that one should work on or think about when joining industry or joining a large pharma company. So it's very much aligned with that. And my answers are very similar to Scott's. There's usually like three or so things that I bring up. Number one, again, is communication. We can all improve on this. We take it very seriously, at our company. In fact, our stats group runs a communication course where our statisticians are, some of our more experienced statisticians teaching newer statisticians like how to communicate. How do you communicate to an executive who maybe has 3 or 4 minutes to really understand your idea? How do you communicate to a totally different audience? How do you communicate, within your peer group? So these are all very different scenarios. How do you write effective emails in a busy world? So communication is really, really critical. And everyone's heard this before, but it's true. We see it all the time in practice. So Scott covered that well. I just wanted to reemphasize that. The second thing in our world of drug development that I think that comes up, and I'll lump these two together, is learning the science and the business. So I would argue that drug development is arguably the most complicated business there is. If you think about it, we're dealing with complicated biology and science that's not well understood. We're dealing with very complicated manufacturing processes now. Once we decide, what drug we want to make, how do we make it? Incredible, quality standards needed, obviously, for that manufacturing. The business, sales, and marketing side is insanely complicated. All these markets are different all over the world. The business side's reimbursement. So everything, we do is really complicated, I think. So to be effective as a statistician at a pharma company, you have to understand a lot of those aspects so that you understand how what you're doing hands off to the next step in the drug development process. If you learn the science and you learn the business, you'll start to make these connections with your quantitative skills, and you'll marry those up with something that's needed in the science or the business area. And that's where we see the most kind of power come out of our superstar statisticians are the ones who can make those connections, propose new ideas themselves, and drive, an initiative, within the company. So those are the two big ones, communication and then learning the science and the business. So um, um, biggest determinants of success, I would say, in a lot of drug development cases. Yeah, I think those would be the two. I think I'll stop there in the interest of time and let Uma get to our next question.
Sure. Yeah. Before, I mean, we are doing well with time,
Doing
and
okay?
before moving forward, I would like to chime in here a little bit as well as a more junior and a female statistician. So I believe, I mean, statisticians, especially working in interdisciplinary environments, face challenges everywhere. And like Scott, I have also some academic background as well. And when I was in academia, that was a similar challenge that I faced. It is very important to, as you both said, understand the clinical question, understand the biology, or understand the science behind what we are doing. And also earning trust takes time, and it is not as straightforward. And especially for women statisticians, it might be a little bit more challenging. It is not impossible. We are doing a lot to overcome with that conscious/unconscious bias, as the Caucus for Women in Statistics and Data Science and the American Statistical Association and the other statistical organizations. Our job is extremely fulfilling, but it comes with some challenges. And thank you very much for your answers. And I think that applies across sectors for our profession. And then I can move to my next question. How statisticians shape the future of pharmaceutical innovation? Rick, would you like to start first?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as I mentioned earlier, this has become a much more, kind of data-driven, kind of business over the last, a couple decades. And at many companies, almost all companies, it's very, very, evidence-based. A lot of these decisions that need to get made are being made more and more based on quantitative input from people like us, statisticians, and maybe a little less of just, executives, flying by the seat of their pants or whatever. So I think the role of the statistician has changed a lot at places like, Lilly and other big pharmas where, we have a bigger seat at the table as far as like helping these decision makers. Sometimes we're the decision maker. Many times we're providing, an unbiased, hopefully unbiased, objective assessment of the evidence and the data to help a decision maker make the best decision. And so that's a huge opportunity. I think, we're very well placed with our training as companies become more data-driven, evidence-driven. I think that's a place we should look at pushing into. And I think Scott may mention something about leadership and those skills as far as what we can do. There's some more technical things on the molecule generation side we could talk about, but I think I'll leave it there and hand it over to Scott.
Yeah, I think, Rick, I agree with the comments you're making. And just to add on to that, I feel like statisticians have to be able to influence, though, because even their best ideas are lost if they're not communicated effectively and provide influence to the decision makers that are in the powers that be along the way. And that's true. That's true in a lot of spaces. I think it's very true in drug development, but it's just like many statisticians out there. You can't even publish the paper unless you convince your reviewers and the editor that your idea is a good one and a solid one. And so that communication is a key to really get acceptance. And so I think to shape the future of pharmaceutical innovation, you do have to think about, how can I be influential in that? What are they looking for? What innovation do I bring? And does that really convince them, or is there a way to convince them of that? So to do that, I think a lot of times you really have to have an ownership mindset. We talked about this a little bit earlier of the broad mindset you need to have. And sometimes you sort of have to learn and adapt and evolve over time, and recognize what is changing in drug development and how can I be ahead of that. So I know a lot of times it's heads down work on technical problems, but every now and then you do have to pull your head up and look and say, do I know where things are going? And I want to be sure I'm not, going down a path that's not going anywhere. You do have to have your heads up and really understand what's going on in the big picture, and having, think about, how do I improve things? How do I look at that environment and think about, how do I want to be part of where that future is going? And then take my skill set and best deliver value in that space. That's not easy. I know I'm saying these words, but it's not easy to do, is to, understand the picture of where things are going and be sure you're ahead of that. That's not an easy component at all. And then even once you get there, taking innovative ideas and convincing others to do them, that's challenging as well. So Umit, I just would comment, while I think we statisticians can shape the future, it's not easy, and it does require a lot of perspective and hard work, both, to get there.
Yeah, thank you very much. So this is the end of my questions, and I see that we have some questions in the chat. The first question is, can you please touch on the different roles that statisticians can play? For instance, innovation groups, TA, safety, medical affairs.
Yeah, I'll be happy to comment on that. I mean, I think statisticians can play in any of those spaces. I know, at least for the 26 years I was at Lilly, there were lots of groups on an innovation space, safety analytics, real world evidence, manufacturing, just I think everywhere that the business is going on. And I know when, in the earlier days, when I think about the late 90s or early 2000s, statisticians weren't so involved in business analytics, but that has all changed as well. So even involved in thinking about, how do we approach marketing issues and also legal issues. So any place where quantitative decisions or quantitative thinking is adding value, which is almost across the spectrum of the business, statisticians are now playing roles and are involved. And so I think that those opportunities, sometimes you have to sort of create them a little bit, but in a big company, in bigger companies, they already exist in many of those spaces.
Thank you very much. Rick, do you have anything to add?
No, I think Scott covered that well. We have people participating at pretty much the entire chain of events in drug development, and so it's all kind of available. Yeah, and all methodologies too. There's lots of there's a lot of areas that are inherently more Bayesian. There's other areas that are not, and lots of different multivariate areas in discovery, and of course all the clinical trial methods. So lots of diversity in statistical technical stuff across that chain as well.
Yeah.
Thank you. And we have another question. What is the educational qualification needed to enter the industry as a statistician? Is it a master's or a PhD?
Yeah, I can take this. I mean, it's primarily a PhD, but we do hire master's people. There are several of us in at least in the discovery space. So it can be done for sure as a project statistician. It depends on maybe some other skill sets coming in along the way. But we certainly look at both degree options in our hiring. So, and I know Scott has participated a lot in this when he was on the lead team at Lilly as well. So he probably has a good input.
Well, but I would just comment, I think there's one thing at Lilly, but I think at a lot of other companies, they primarily hire master's level people. They want people with experience, but they're really looking for more people that are able to implement and drive things through. They're restricting their usage of PhDs to maybe a few more innovation spaces, but and so they have a little bit different distribution than maybe what happens at Lilly. But I think In general, though, having at least a master's degree is at most places in drug development is generally required. Not many are hiring out of a bachelor's level.
Thank you. And we have another question from the Q&A. How can undergraduate students in data analytics best prepare for this field?
I can start with a few thoughts. I think it's getting involved in experiential learning, really tackling some real world problems, because what you see in the classroom is valuable and important, and it sort of frames a lot of things that you'll encounter, but tackling some problems, some real world problems, even if you just do so on a voluntary basis, I think you see how messy things are, how messy the data is, what some of the real challenges are in tackling some problems by just getting some experiential learning. That, I think, is something I'd really recommend. That will also probably inspire you to understand what you like and don't like about the field. You may say, oh, I love doing research and detailed work, or I really like the sense of accomplishment of programming, or I like, sort of production and getting things done. I have a sense of accomplishment with that. You may sort of understand what you like about the area a little better by getting your hands dirty in experiential learning.
Yeah, I agree. As an undergraduate, you can already start working on things like your communication skills and, being a good, learning how to write well, communicate well, give a good, tight, clear presentation. Computational skills, of course, are things that are, obvious and important. And then getting that, like Scott said, that experiential learning, like learning, like running an experiment in the lab and just seeing all the things that can go wrong. I think that's invaluable for a statistician to have actually done science, and it'll help you when you work with scientists, in the future, and trying to meet people in the middle, as Scott mentioned, when you're implementing some of the math concepts with the real world where experiments get conducted would be helpful. Yep.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess we don't have any other questions, and we are almost at the top. So I would like to thank our panelists for accepting my invitation. I hope you find it very valuable, informative, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me with any further questions, or if you want to chat about industry or academia too. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Umut. I'm welcome to take questions as well at any point. You can find me on LinkedIn. Thanks all.